Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar from Spec Innovations Issue Tracking. My name is Taylor Duffy, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. First, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. During the presentation, feel free to send us questions, and we will get them answered in the Q&A part of the webinar. You can also interact with us on LinkedIn through the Innoslate users group or through Twitter using the handle @SpecInnovations. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you after the live presentation, so keep an eye out for it in your inbox. Now, I'd like to introduce to you our presenter, Dr. Stephen Dam. In today's webinar, Dr. Dam will cover the ways to uncover issues through the use of Innoslate's Intelligence View and GitHub compatibility. He will also cover other issue tracking methods in Innoslate, such as its transparent single source of truth, centralized views, tasking, digital documents, collaboration, customization, reporting, and gap analysis. Dr. Dam has been involved with research, experiments, operations analysis, software development, systems engineering, and training for more than 40 years. He has also received an Expert Systems Engineering Professional ESEP certification from INCOSE. He is currently applying systems engineering techniques to various DoD, DOE, and commercial projects. Feel free to send him any questions through the LinkedIn users group or send him an email to steven.dam@specinnovations.com. And now I'll hand over the controls to Dr. Dam and we'll get started.
Thanks, Taylor. So let's talk a little bit about some of the topics we're going to hit today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the single source of truth and what that means and doesn't mean this in context. Talk a little bit about why issue tracking is important. And then we're going to talk about issues versus requirements and those different perspectives as well. Transforming requirements into issues. We're going to talk about collaboration and tasking and monitoring progress and gap analysis. So let's start off with the whole thing about single sources of truth. So according to HubSpot, it's basically collecting data across the enterprise and aggregating it to a central repository. I'm not sure that's what everybody thinks it means, but that's was a pretty good general consensus when looking up the term. So, and the basic idea is that this gives us transparency in the organization to the information that's needed by the different people within the organization. So Department of Defense actually began with this idea when they created their digital engineering strategy. But they very rapidly moved to something they're calling the authoritative source of truth. Because what they recognize that the central repository idea, particularly for their as broad, big an organization as DoD is really impossible and probably isn't even really desirable for a lot of reasons, security reasons, need to know issues, things like that. So there's a lot of reasons why you probably don't want just one central repository. So they're looking at federated repositories and determining, well, who really owns that data and who really needs to control that data, and then who should have access to that data. So those are all kinds of questions that I think actually every organization needs to grapple with to a certain extent. So for issue tracking, the single source of truth may end up requiring duplication because oftentimes you're using different tools, and different tools have different databases, and they require the information to be in that database to be able to be used and perform their functions. So if you don't have this, so this is where we get into some really thorny issues with this problem. And so again, the single source of truth may be really, you're talking about a virtual central repository. You want to think about that, and the key is to make sure that if you have duplicated information or related information to each other, that those relationships or duplications are somehow synchronized. So again, this becomes a configuration management problem. If you have to do it manually, it's almost untenable. And in fact, that's the situation we find ourselves today. Often if you're using many tools to do your systems engineering project, you will find yourself in this situation a lot. And issue tracking is just one aspect of that. So let's talk a little bit more about why issue tracking is important. Well, first of all, in software development, issue tracking is basically the process for monitoring software defects and problems as that arise, or before or after deployment. Again, this is things with that, but it's a little more than that. So if the picture here I have on the right is from GitHub, it's actually from our repository, looking at the Innoslate 4.x issues that we have coming up. And when in systems engineering, though, when we talk about a risk issue, it's really what probably was a risk originally, if you did your analysis correctly, and it became 100% probability of occurrence because it happened. So in fact, the DoD Risk Issues and Opportunities Guide kind of characterizes issues in that way. Oftentimes, again, that if you've done your risk analysis and been working through that, you already know what the consequence of the issue is, and you'll be able to have some mitigation strategies planned. But oftentimes it's a matter of just you found a bug in the software, or it's a problem that you're trying to deal with. So software tools such as GitHub, Jira, GitLab, again, use issue tracking not only for problems, but also for requirements management. This is actually the way they look at, from the software world, they look at the information that's coming to them, and the functional requirements that start the agile process get lumped in as issues and be tracked as issues in the repository just like they were anything else. So it's not a separate requirements tool and a requirements discipline. So this is what really one of the big differentiators between software engineering and systems engineering. Systems engineering is very focused on requirements and requirements development and making sure we have good, strong requirements. In software engineering, they're thinking more in terms of, well, I've got my functional requirements, great, but they don't do everything, and issues pop up, and I find problems as I'm writing the code, and so I create an issue and track that. So you find that, or support call, hey, there's a bug. Yeah, we got to go fix that, add that to the list. Those are the kinds of things that happen a lot in the software world. So again, very, very different than what the systems engineering perspective is on this topic. And that really gets us into the whole issues versus requirements. So again, issues are problems that require urgency to solve them. And we do have an issues class in Innoslate today. It's not a standard LML class. It's an extra one that was added, again, to support the Risk Issues Opportunities Guide from DoD. So it brings in here assignees and priority, consequence, narrative, and value associated with it. So again, some options of how you can deal with it, one that's controlling it. So this is the kind of thing you might be developing if you're building issues directly in Innoslate. Again, it can be bugs or usability problems. Again, we identify those with labels in Innoslate, and in most of the other tools, that's the same way it's done. In fact, if you look at GitHub, you'll see that there are labels associated with different types of problems that we've identified. In requirements, requirements is a little different because basically the key is it's looking at taking the needs and desires that have come from the top level and of why was the project even done. You have some kind of user need you're satisfying ultimately. So that's where that is. And then the key is we're trying to take those and refine them to something that a developer can go off and do something. That developer may be software, maybe hardware developers, maybe electrical, maybe environmental. Again, lots of requirements beyond software, right? In the systems world, we're dealing with requirements for everybody, not just for software. So one of the things that distinguishes it particularly is that rationale field. So why do you have this requirement? Why do I need this requirement? Because requirements cost money. So you want to make sure you have a good rationale for it. And then the other is that you have quality factors, which you're seeing some of their clear, complete, consistent. So So again, there's a number of other factors, and then COSI has developed a very good guide on that subject as well. And we could see, you see some more of those in our in the tool, and particularly also in our intelligence view. Anyway, so requirements and issues come from many sources. One of the sources that we look for, and we provide this on the dashboard of Innoslate, is a feedback form. That's a great place for users to suggest things that would make the tool better. That's not meant for problems. If you're having a real issue, you think you found a bug, or you're having difficulty using something, then contact support directly, and they pass that issue on to us in the software development team, and have them work with it as well. So again, this is part of how to get things into the system. In many projects, there's a very formal process for this, and it gets into the whole change management control board and things like that. So these are things that you may find yourself into if you're working with this kind of problem in other domains. So Innoslate enables transformation requirements into issues. That's one of the things you can do, is you can basically create directly in our GitHub interface, which I'm going to talk to in more detail a little bit later. But the key is that, again, functional requirements are what's developed by systems engineers. Then they turn those, we push those into GitHub as issues. Again, that's how they treat them. So you can do this by synchronizing, and we use this to synchronize and track the requirements issues. And of course, one of the things is we've automated a lot of this process. And so one of the things we've done with that is starting with collaboration, again, between systems engineers and software engineers, pushing those requirements into GitHub. So if you take that previous picture, let me go back one just so you see it. So this is that issues picture out of the GitHub viewer that we have in Innoslate. If you hover over that top right corner, just below the sign out button, you take a look at, and you see that right here, I've got plus and an upload sign. The plus sign is if you're going to create an individual issue. So let's say something popped up and say in the middle of a development cycle, and you said, oh gosh, this is such a critical bug issue, we got to get it fixed. So we added it in. Otherwise, you could upload an entire document. That's the upload arrow on the right, that up arrow. That's if we, particularly this is something we just did as we were creating the 4.9 requirement deck in Innoslate. We wanted to get all that information into an issue set for the next round of development. So that we use that for that purpose. So again, continuing to push those in, that up arrow provides a means to provide that appropriate document. And so when you push that arrow, you get this user interface. So it says creating issues from a document, and it select what document you want. So this was 4.8, but if I wanted 4.9, I would collect the 4.9 document, use it. And then there are various modes here, nested, and some other things you can do as well. So I'll explain these as we go. So the nested, what it does is it will take a decomposition of requirements and put it in as checkboxes in GitHub. So if you see here on the right, that's actually in GitHub, and it has a list of things that need to be done that are associated with this higher level problem. So that's a good way to make it a little bit easier, fewer things to go through. They are treated as individual issues in GitHub as well, and they're updated in Innoslate as well that way. So again, I haven't got that part yet, but I will. Again, doing that. So part of the process is when you do that upload from that requirements document, we create an issue in Innoslate to track it. And the purpose of that is to give it a unique identifier number. and create a linkage in it. So there's a little bit of a separation going on here between requirements now and issues. And we're doing that on purpose because what we want to do is make sure that the issue is not complete just because you've got the code for it, right? You've got to have tested that code, verified it operationally. So there are many other steps before that requirement status would be complete. So just because I've got software written doesn't mean I'm done. And so that's another reason to make the issues separate. So this is, again, a little place where duplication starts coming in, and the tool has to manage that duplication. And so that's what we're doing. Now there's a webhook is how you connect into GitHub. And so that gives us that information. And as that works, the updates, it gives us an update to the history. So you'll see the history. And currently, we've got unknown in there because it's coming from a separate tool, right? So this is the history file in Innoslate that you see. And this update is coming directly from GitHub. It just doesn't know who the user is at this point in time. Again, there's probably some things we can do to add that in the future, and we're looking into that, how best to add that in so there isn't confusion between the two different tools. And I guess, again, issues can be developed directly in GitHub and then pushed to Innoslate for tracking as well. So that's another thing that's available. And so that then ultimately creates the issue, and then you might want to tie it to a requirement, or you might be creating a new requirement in the process as well, depending on what's going on. So let's take I've been mentioning this whole GitHub interface. If you're not familiar with it, we have it. I'll show you particularly. So when you're in that stage, you've created those functional requirements. The systems engineer has multiple roles still to play. One of which is to monitor the software development, just like they'd monitor a hardware development and track activities. And if there were problems along the way, which there always are, there are questions about the requirements, or the requirement is over constraining. That can happen a lot. The design community could come back to you and say, hey, look, I could save you a lot of money if we change this requirement. That's the kind of thing a systems engineer needs to go through a process and say, well, what's the impact of that? Can we change that requirement? Get the customer's permission to change that requirement if they've signed off on those requirements, going through the configuration management boards, all those kinds of things. So that's a really key part of the job for systems engineers during that development phase. So again, as software development, we're going to be monitoring. Innoslate provides a full set of views to support the monitoring efforts. So first, you have to go to GitHub and get a token. So you have to have access to the tool. That could be read-only access, but you have to have some kind of access to the repository. And then you might have access to a selection of repositories, and these are all the repositories we currently have. We're tracking a number of different things going on with the tool related to it, but the primary one is that top left one, the Innoslate 4.x. So coming in here, coming in with the overview. So the first thing you come up with once you've selected a repository is, will show this up. And by the way, notice you can always return to the repositories at the bottom left-hand corner. So I can go back and select a different repository if I want to, once I've made the connection. Here I've got a good picture of with the pull requests. What are the active pull requests that are there? What are my active issues, recent open issues as well, and commitments per week. Again, this is shown over the last year time frame. So this gives you a very good historical perspective. If you scroll down, you'll see also the recent commits. So you can see the recent timeline for people making commitments to the project. By the way, if you're not familiar with the terms commitments and pulls and things like that, I do have a slide at the end that actually has those definitions for you. So when you ask for the slide deck, we'll be glad to provide that for you. Okay, so another aspect of it is the Kanban board. So the Kanban board gives us the means to track progress of specific issues. We can provide also comments. So if I select, there's a hyperlink. I guess it's not obvious here on this with it. I think I picked that top one, pinned and unpinned relationship sidebar. And so, yeah, I picked that one. And then, so in here, I can type in comments if I want to, and then add a comment that goes to the developer. I can also add labels and adjust the priority of it that way. And then add assignees. Now, obviously, to do these kinds of tasks, I've got to have a certain relationship with my software developers that say, hey, can I do this? Or do I want to ask, I might ask the lead software developer to use Innoslate to do this kind of thing as well. So again, it's another way to update information that's in the database. Issues, again, that issues tab here provides the means to search and add issues. So I can hit that search, and remember I talked about the adding here a minute ago. It turns out upper right, and I'll show that again here. Also notice, by the way, in this view, I can filter by author, label. I can do sort, different kinds of sorts as well. So again, ways to help me find and search and filter the set of issues I'm watching and tracking. As I mentioned, it's that top right corner again. If you hover over it, that's where those pop up for you. So again, putting that in context, hopefully that'll help you see where that is. That's probably one of the non-intuitive things right now that we have is that hover over that shows those buttons. Not sure why we implemented it that way, but we did. Anyway, so commits shows us individual commitments have been made in the most recent order. So that's what that list is. It can be a long list. Commit activity is the last one. That shows me specifically who's been doing what over the last 6 months or so. So you know, some people like Jenna there on the right, she basically has is working school issues and other things, so she's not been working for a while. Most of the other guys you see are very active and very have done a lot of work in this area. Okay, so that's that part of the monitoring. Then the other part is gap analysis. So how do we know when we have it all traced together correctly? Well, first of all, we've got a traceability matrix that you can use for this purpose. So as you hover over any cell, if that hasn't been created, the connection, in this case, this is auto-connected, these two items that I'm showing, you can see the name, number, description, and you can see how it all works together. Now, so 1.8 there, though, is missing the X, and of course, I'd have to scroll down just to make sure it wasn't somewhere else. But in this case, I know it isn't, because another thing I can do is look at database view. And so here I have database view set up with an issue tracking query. And what I have is the requirements here on the left part of it, and that's what I'm starting from. And then the related element I create for that is the actual issues themselves. And you can see that white space that's missing. And if I go back again, I can see that 1.8, the weird behavior one, is missing that. That's because that came from and was pushed into directly back to Innoslate. So some work needs to be done to clean that up a little bit. But again, this helps you start identifying problems and gaps in terms of information. So there's, again, a lot you can do with this in terms of monitoring and working with it. We have a lot of future planned for this. We basically have, we're not talking about today, but we created links with our testing tool, Selenium. And we're looking at other testing tools as well, and our test center. And so we can update those status of the requirements as well that way, using the test cases to update the test cases. So again, here's a place where we could then go in and add that and create even more issue tracking capabilities end to end with the whole tool. So again, lots of things you could do with issue tracking and work through this as you need it. So I don't know if we have any questions yet.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Dan. We've received several already, but if you haven't done so, please send your questions through the panel on the right. He will answer as many questions as he can before his time is up. So the first is, what integrations do you have to help with issue tracking?
So yeah, the main one I was showing you was the GitHub interface. That's the strong interface between the software developers and the systems engineers. Now, ideally, your hardware engineers are using something like Innoslate, so they could use that directly for their issue tracking if they'd like, or their requirements tracking. That's probably the best thing, because then they can link their other integrations together. So if they're using like a CAD tool, you're talking to your mechanical engineers, they've got their CAD tools. We have a CAD viewer, and you can link that together directly to the requirements and things like that. So that'd be probably the kind of interface most people would be wanting to use.
Great.
Next question.
Our next question, how can AI help with issue tracking?
So AI, we have a couple things we use right now, which is the NLP checker for in particularly that traceability matrix. It helps you find traceability assistant and suspect assist. That's one mechanism we have for that. We've just added Chat GPT for the cloud version. And so what we're doing there is training it in various ways. One of the things that I found very interesting was the ability to potentially create test cases or test information from verification requirements. So here's another place where you can start making linkages and traces. Again, issue tracking as much, again, the AI itself developing and finding issues, maybe. I'm not sure where that will go in the future. Those are the types of things we might be able to be used for. Next question.
In design development, issues include assumptions, TBDs, and TBBs. If unresolved in a certain time frame or phase of design development, they can become risks. What you are presenting here does not seem readily applicable to design issues and risks. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, we do have the risk analysis as well, and we certainly can tie in the design issues. And of course, you can put in the description field TBDs or whatever. And so that can certainly be tracked and captured as well. So I don't think there's anything that prevents using the tool for that purpose. Is it as fully automated as we're doing with the software? Not yet. Again, I think it depends on what are the other tools you might want to integrate with to do that work. But yeah, I don't see why we couldn't support that.
Those look like all the questions we have. Do you have any last notes before I close out?
No, I don't think so. I think, I have a feeling a lot of people are still recovering from Hawaii. For those who don't know, the Nkosi International Symposium was in Hawaii this year. So a lot of us are still trying to get over our jet lag from that, coming back from it.
Um,
You have any?
the last question, just added on, I believe we can use Innoslate issues and track to risks and not have to use GitHub.
Oh yeah, certainly. If you're not doing software development already in a like GitHub, you don't have to. You certainly can do everything in Innoslate for that purpose. The thing is that most of the software developers are using it for the software repository features of it, and so that's really important to their processes. And I think it's very important for systems engineers to remember that our job is to help translate information between different design disciplines, not supplant them completely. So we're being very careful within Innoslate not to try to push the boundaries of what it's really meant for. It's really a integrated systems engineering program management tool, and we're working the design engineering interfaces where it makes sense and appropriate to create that digital thread that you're looking for.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
I'll close us out. We would like to thank you again for joining us today. As a reminder, we'll be following up with you very soon. Send you a link to the recording and the presentation slide deck. We hope you can tune into our next recorded webinar, Summer Intern Special, coming out on August 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to register through the link that will come out in August's newsletter to receive the slides and recording. We also encourage you to visit our website and our blog, as well as connect with us on social media. That concludes today's presentation. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.